Elephant and Paranoid Park are also Portland based.
Yeah, later on. I had actually moved to New York for about a year and a half in 2000, and then just moved back to Portland after that time. But yeah, later on, after I lived in New York a bit, those were set. And they weren't really, the original stories weren't particularly set there. Elephant was shot in Portland. It was sort of a generic city, a generic high school. Last Days, which is, originally sort of cued off of the Kurt Cobain's Last Days, was, even though we were sort of desperate to find a house that was something that would emulate his house, which was a pretty large craftsman-style Northwest house. Somehow the houses we had there didn't do what I wanted, so we shot that in Cold Spring, New York, north of New York City, about 30 minutes. So I actually went, for some of the films I would go outside of Portland, but tried to stay in Portland when I could.
Melanoche is a story about very young people. It's about immigrants from Mexico living in Portland. And many of your films to follow a young person or a group of youngsters are in the center of the story. And of course, this period between adolescence and adulthood is very important and can be very dramatic and filled with conflicts. Is it this which fascinates you in
it depends on the story.
Stories about
coming of age stories. I think I'm not really positive. Each story has different relationships. A lot of times there are coming of age stories involved. I guess Good Will Hunting would be one. There are varieties. A lot of times I do have younger characters in the films, but I don't think I've actually done quite yet the true coming of age story. Maybe in the future. But it's I'm not sure.
But do you have these stories, like, I think it's called your Death Trilogy, about young people in connection with death. I'm thinking of Jerry and Elephant and Last Days.
I mean, there were young people in the stories. In one case, it was the high school based on the Columbine massacre in Denver, Colorado. And the first one that I had written was right after Kurt Cobain died. River Phoenix had just died as well. So it was written in sort of like this winter right after Kurt died. And it was a sort of very experimental idea. I just made a list of what I had heard. Kurt's favorite things were things like he liked macaroni and cheese with extra milk. He liked to watch MTV, and he had apparently done certain things in the last sort of missing few days of his life. That was the first one, and he was found with a gunshot in his head, apparently suicide. So that was, a missing 3 days about a person's death by their own hand. And the other ones just so happened to be a variety. Like the first, in Jerry, the two characters that wander into the desert were based on two Bostonian young men who had gone into the desert and weren't really experienced hikers and had gotten stuck. And one of them had killed the other one. And the sort of mystery to that was that only one returned, so it was hard to figure out through his memory exactly what had happened, because he was delirious and he didn't quite know whether he had what he had seen or what he had done. So that was death by basically outside force, nature. And then Columbine was death by a fellow man's hand. So there were sort of three phases of death.
Yeah, they are all based on real events. And So, for instance, Jerry, was that from a newspaper article you got the idea to write the
Yes,
script?
that was something that Matt Damon had told me about. They were Boston kids, so I think he, being a Bostonian, he had read this article about these two guys that got lost in the desert. Since then, there had been a book written about this particular incident that happened in New Mexico. They were the two Boston kids were in New Mexico. So yeah, it was a pretty. It was an article that went a lot of places, but I heard about it through Matt.
So, in especially Elephant and also Paranoid Park, and in your first film, La Noche, you work with non-actors. They are very young people, and I don't think they have very much acting experience. How do you get the people for your films, and how do you work with these non-actors or amateur actors?
I think that when I was in film school, we didn't really have access to actors, so we were using our friends, and they were all non-actors. I think I learned my craft using people that had never acted before, and since I was not an actor as well, I think I was comfortable working with non-actors. When I worked with a real stage actor, for instance, a lot of strange things would happen because of my inexperience, and maybe also stage acting translating to film. But that was sort of my general relationship with non-actors. With Elephant, for instance, we used so many everyone was pretty much a non-actor. But they were also high school students, and in that particular case, we were able to put advertisements around town, and lots of people answered the ads. And we were casting, all the characters that are cast in Elephant are basically playing themselves. They look, and sometimes the parts are written around them. Sometimes somebody would show up, and we would write around that particular person. And they seem to just be able to, we used the ones that were particularly good at improvising, but they seem to be able to just do these fantastic things, not really knowing how difficult it actually is as an actor. And they were very, very at ease. And when we made Last Days right after that, nobody really at the auditions, we put advertisements around for rock and rollers, and not high school students this time, and basically nobody showed up. Just more high schoolers showed up. And I always took that to mean that, well, for one thing, in the States, and I'm not sure about in Sweden, there's not really that much for high school kids to do. They, unless they're doing organized sports or something, they're usually hanging around. So I think the free time, as well as just the idea that they could do something in a movie, brought them to us, and everybody from the jocks to the library characters were sort of there for us to cast. But when it came to other elements, like later when we had a little bit older, say 28-year-old rock and rollers, unless we went out and found them in rock and roll clubs, they weren't really going to show up, and they also weren't interested in acting in a film. So we basically cast our friends, or at least that's what we were ending up with.
I think also in all these three films you said you had quite short scripts, or almost no script at all. But also for when you're talking about Elephant, I think you mentioned yesterday in the masterclass that you had suggested some of the actors there to talk about specific things, and then they had better ideas and they changed, and you thought that was...
Yeah, in all three films. And
it's about 75, 80 or...
I guess it's shorter, yeah, it's probably 85, I think. But it was more like a poem, like a 10-page little poem about something that was going to be a film. and then everything else, all the words, because the words were basically in my plan, unimportant in all three of them, Jerry, Elephant, and Last Days, the dialogue was more like part of the scene, more like set dressing or wallpaper. So it didn't really matter what the characters said, just so long as they were talking at different times, if they were talking. And those improvs that were done in all three films were kind of made up by the actors. In the case of Elephant, yeah, there were huge, long pieces of dialogue that the students just made up and were sort of like prepared for that. We had done a lot of our casting by running improvs, so they were improving, but it was fascinating how like amazing, how talented they were doing that.